off
If
right
in
yet.
fact you feel lucky. I mean, I've got a ton of them here. This is our eternal optimism at actually thinking that we can cast seeds and have them take.
Well, that makes sense.
And these are commuter lilies, which if it was a little earlier in the season would be open, because they're actually lilies that open in the evening and at dawn and then close during the day. So they're actually good to have because we're never home during the day to see them. So they're usually open when we come home, and they seem to do pretty well here. Where do we steal them from?
Bottom.
Ah, good.
How long have y'all lived here?
We moved in 1993. We had lived out in the county, and I was trying to live a little bit closer to work, so we were using a realtor right down the road here, and we had told her to look for a transitional or modern house, blah, blah, blah. And then we drove by this one, and she actually, it wasn't listed yet, and she said, this one's available, and it looks really similar to a house, actually to houses that both of us grew up in. So we went and walked through it, and it was definitely the one. And so we were lucky enough to pick it up.
How old is it?
Built in 1935. This whole neighborhood, this is one of the first Duke faculty ghettos. So this was originally all part of Duke Forest here, and they started building the houses out from the campus. And ours was not the first. I think the oldest house is down the street, maybe 1928 or so. This one's 35, and a lot of them were self-designed by the owners and were actually inhabited by faculty because it was a faculty development. So this guy was a chemistry professor at Duke, and he designed the house. And it's been interesting because we've actually met everyone who ever lived in it. They've all come back at one time or another and knocked on the door and said, do you mind if we walk through? So we never met the actual father, but we met his daughter who grew up in this house. And it's been interesting to have them describe what was added and what was done. That side piece there used to be the garage, so the fan above was actually above the garage door. And the gentleman went blind apparently before he died, but he kept driving. And we had heard this apocryphal story about how there were two bumpers on either side that let him sort of bounce off of them and go in the door of the garage, and we thought that was kind of funny. And then when we were digging that garden out, we found them. So apparently it was true that he kept driving pretty late in the game. Yeah, it's a nice place to live. I mean, we find it important to have sort of a hideaway or sanctuary to go home to. So we spend an awful lot of time right here. So we're just working on trying to get it right and comfortable. Well, anyway,
Who are your cats?
for some reason, they're very comfortable with you being here.
That one's Joe Friday.
Joe Friday over there, and this is Dixie, who, if you know the story, Joe Friday, of course, is Dragnet, and Dixie was Joe Friday's girlfriend. So
Actually, it was Jack Webb's wife.
Jack Webb's wife. I get them mixed up. It's like reality is confusing. Do you want to, have us lead you somewhere? I don't want to go somewhere where the camera is going to object.
She's going to follow you around, but she's just getting the cat right now.
Okay.
And then it'll take us probably 10 minutes to set up in there. You can just keep doing whatever you do.
That's Dixie or Joe?
That's Dixie. Dixie was a stray. Actually, all of our cats used to belong to a guy that I worked with, and he had to get rid of him because of his asthma, so he's been a great cat. But it's our luck or bad luck or whatever. They're all always great tabbies, so we end up with multiple great tabby cats.
Susan, I'm going to go check on them.
Okay.
Yeah, y'all keep
Okay.
Wanda.
So we're supposed to be talking to each other, so.
Here's another one of these Jazz plants we've been talking about.
Oh, and actually, look at this.
Oh, yeah, this is the porcelain vine, and the berries come out in bizarre colors. Turquoise,
Yeah, see.
dark blue, purple.
Oh, that's unusual.
It is
But
unusual.
it's a invasive weed, so most of the time we just, plus the Japanese beetles love it, so all summer we have to knock the Japanese beetles off, and then they're slowly eating all of the berries, which are the main reason that we bought it. So we always hold out hope.
Whenever you're ready.
We talked about the death of these three different plants.
Yeah, I know. Just when
Whenever
they're
they
starting
turn
to come
brown, you
out
got
too.
to start to pull them out.
But there's still hope for this.
Yeah, should we?
Could just all over the place. Poison ivy, wisteria, mimosa. All the weed stuff does great, and then the stuff that we actually try to cultivate does fairly well. But this actually is a tough time of year. The spring is.
And, you know, that's hard to
Yeah, I mean,
understand, but they have to be consistent.
Mhm.
So, how are we sounding? We sound good. We've got good levels, good. Okay.
I'll just
I'm
sit
glad.
right
Where are
here.
you
I'll
gonna be,
stoop,
Jay? You okay?
stoop right here. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, you know, we're gonna edit all of this.
Sure.
So we're gonna just talk conversation.
Okay.
I don't have questions. I've
Mhm.
got other work here, so I just sort of.
I have other things to do.
Yeah. No. And I'm gonna try not to squeak this chair.
Okay.
But the first question is, if you'll tell me your name, please.
Oh, I'm Lou Wardell.
Okay. Where did you grow up? I don't know anything about
Oh.
your life or who you are.
I grew up in Connecticut. I was born in Norwalk, and then we lived up in West Hartford till I was about 5 or 6, and then moved down to New Haven. So actually to the town of Hamden, which is a suburb of New Haven. So I did most of my growing up through high school in the New Haven area, and then came to school here in Durham. So after that point, it was really just visiting up there and living here.
But growing up in Connecticut, what about your family life? Can you tell us a little, brothers, sisters? What your
Yeah, I've
parents
got
did?
2 older brothers. Sure, I do. I have 2 older sisters and an older brother, with the sisters being older than my brother. So I was the youngest of 4. My dad worked for the telephone company as a executive. My mother was a housewife, and so, you know, she was at home with us. And it was pretty straightforward life. We lived in a neighborhood actually kind of similar to the one we're in right now. When we were up there, it was actually a Yale faculty ghetto, and we were one of the few families that didn't actually have a direct Yale affiliation. But it was a pretty tightly knit group on the Yale side, so we tended to gravitate. We didn't actually hang in the neighborhood much because we gravitated towards other folks. But I went to a real diverse high school, a public high school, large public high school, and it was really diverse, which I just thought was terrific. I had a great time in high school. It was a good experience, and that's when I started. I actually got into playing music when I was in grammar school, but continued through high school.
What was your first instrument? I'm assuming you played like we all did. You took those tests.
Ukulele lessons, just like
Really?
everyone. Yeah, I mean that's what I started with. The grammar school I was in made every 3rd grader take ukulele. Now that they must have gotten a deal on the ukuleles or something. So they made every 3rd grader take ukulele, and that's where they tried to have you pick up sense of rhythm and being able to read music. I mean, actually read chords and things like that, which I thought was pretty forward thinking. And then when you got to 4th grade, you got to actually choose what instrument you might want to concentrate on. So I chose trumpet and played trumpet from the 4th grade right till I got into Duke.
Marching band?
Well, started out a marching band, and then the high school was large enough that I had a jazz band that I got into, and it was mostly it was mostly like big band jazz. The guy that was doing it really liked putting together about I guess it was like a 12 piece. So we did a lot of big band jazz and performed at the Quinnipiac Jazz Festival, which actually was then fairly prestigious. I haven't really kept up with it since, but did the jazz thing and then also got into classical training. So I was in the New Haven Training Symphony for all the way through high school, I guess. And thought I was pretty good, but when you're in a orchestra, your progression is supposed to be fourth seat, third seat, second seat, So I was going into senior year, and it was my turn to be first seat because the really fabulous first seat trumpet player had graduated from high school, and then this ninth grader showed up at auditions, and they were having us do these really difficult transpositions, just sight reading and doing 5-key transpositions and stuff, and I had kind of relied on natural ability, and this kid was prodigy quality, so he just blew me away, and that kind of was the end of trumpet playing. It made me face the fact that I was not going to be a fabulous trumpet player, so I kind of let it when I got to Duke, I really let it drop. And actually there was really no place for me to play trumpet down here. At the time I came to Duke, it was quite a bit more less urban, less cosmo, so there wasn't a whole lot going on in terms of classical music.
Marsalis didn't live in
No, he did not. Did not.
See, I had you pegged as a Dave Clark 5 kind of,
Mm-hmm.
rock and roll.
Well, there was this group of guys that played in the jazz band with me, and we kind of put together this. First, we put together a brass quartet, and would go down to the New Haven Green at Christmas and play Christmas carols, and would show up at ball games and be like our own idiotic mini marching band. And then a couple of those guys ended up taking up guitar. So they went off and started doing rock music, and I was still playing trumpet. So we actually morphed into something of a rhythm and blues band, and I actually played a gig or two on trumpet doing, just Motown stuff and Midnight Hour, Under My Thumb, just stuff like that. But because my training was mostly classical and reading music, I just could not improvise on the trumpet. And so needless to say, I wasn't a good trumpet player. It wasn't a very good group, but that was kind of at the point where we were all starting to listen to a lot of rock music and get into rock music.
So glad we're talking about this. Excuse me, how are we looking? How is that? Do you want to clip that live on him just as a backup, or are you happy with the audio?
I'm pretty happy with the audio.
Okay.
He hadn't knocked it
Okay.
over.
He's a hand talker. Okay. Now I just want to say. You feeling good?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
fine.
All right. I mean, you know this stuff. This is not hard. So what?
It's a long time ago.
Well, how long ago was it? What years are we talking about?
Let's say I was in high school from 66 to 69. So that was when I got out, when I graduated. I guess it was the summer I graduated that Woodstock happened. So, that by that point, we were really just totally into rock music. And I had been actually for a while. The Jefferson Airplane was really my favorite group back then. And I had already started focusing on Jack Cassidy and really paying attention to him, not necessarily to listen to the bass line, but I just thought he was the coolest guy in the band. And there were some other groups like the original Blood, Sweat, and Tears with the Al Cooper version of it. And they had a really good bass player named, I think, Bill Fielder. And that's when I really started paying attention to the bass lines in a song over the other music that was occurring. So I remember just thinking, that's really a great sound. And that's when I really first started getting interested in the bass guitar as the best instrument in a band, So so during the summers I went to Woodstock and spent a lot of time. If I was going to go out, we were always going to concerts and stuff. And living in New Haven was good because it was close to New York, and so if we wanted to, we could go into New York and hear bands, or they'd eventually make their way out to Connecticut. So there was a lot of listening.
You were so lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great time.
I was living out in the country in North
Oh,
Carolina
yeah.
and just wishing, I was watching Shindig and Hullabaloo and, those wishing that, and those bands never toured down here.
I can imagine. Well, I remember when I came to Duke, Duke was pretty good at attracting bands, and when I was a freshman, there were like James Brown played, and can't really remember too many of the others, but there was plenty of music on campus or over at UNC.
Yeah.
But when you got into the boonies, it got pretty slim.
Why Duke? What brought you down here? How did you know about it?
I have a cousin who was on the faculty and had come down here in '65. He's an engineer, and so he talked about it a lot. And we spent a lot of time with him because in the summers would go out on my uncle's boat to like Nantucket and Cape Cod, and usually spend a couple of weeks out there, and he and his wife would usually come out. So he talked a lot about Duke, and so I was familiar with it. And then my sister actually applied to school here and had come down and toured it. And of course, anyone who's been at Duke and taken the tour, a lot of other places pale in comparison. So when it came time, I came down and toured and was interviewed here at Duke too. And I had gone to Colgate in like dead winter, like January or February, and it was just gray and frozen and dismal. And then probably in March I came down here, and already in March, of course, things are out, flowers are out, it's already 75 degrees, and it was just no contest. So Duke was very attractive, and I thought that I'd have a good support system having some family down here, and it was a pretty good choice.
Pretty good. Well, what did you major in? And
Majored in psychology, and actually I worked in movie theaters when I was in high school. And so when I got down here and went into psychology, I actually did it with an eye towards going into advertising and how you can manipulate people psychologically with your presentation. And I just thought that was an interesting thing to do. And as it turned out, I didn't use that at all ever in my life. I mean, although I mean, I learned manipulation techniques, but applied them obviously for a different reason when I was interviewing people as a cop. But that's why I got into psychology, and it was, I followed a very liberal arts path. Did a little of this, a little of that. I almost accumulated enough to be a religion major, but didn't, and didn't feel that I needed to. But it was just kind of whatever was interesting, just sort of pick from the list and do it that way.
do you remember your first impressions of Durham? And I know I got the campus. I mean, I'm sure it was
Yeah.
just the coolest place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But the town itself and what was going on, sort of.
Yeah, it was, when I first started here, it was very common and normal to walk from campus downtown and go shopping or go to a movie or go eat at a restaurant. Downtown Durham was very alive. I mean, there were a lot of restaurants there. There were probably 3 theaters still open when I was just arriving here. If you wanted to buy a record or something, there were 2 record stores down in the middle of downtown.
Remember the names of them?
Yeah, the Record and Tape Center was one, and the Record Bar was the other, and the Record Bar ended up being monstrous. So we got around quite a bit, and then freshmen weren't allowed to have cars, till second semester. So second semester, I actually rode my motorcycle down from Connecticut, and so I had some wheels here, and that's when I first started being able to get out and look at the Duke Forest and sort of go far afield. And there was a guy in my dorm room, or dorm floor, that was local. He lived in Durham, and I got real good friends with him and his mother, and so we ended up, having somebody who lived nearby that we could go and see in the neighborhood and everything. And I ended up living off campus at her house for a time, my second year, in East Durham. I actually moved off campus very quickly. I ended up living off campus after freshman year anyway, so I always lived in a house somewhere in Durham.
Okay. We're talking about 1969.
Mm-hmm.
Kent State happened that spring, 70.
Right.
That spring,
Mm-hmm.
and everything just sort of changed on campuses. I mean, I remember the Earth Day and all those things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to picture who you were then. Were you like Mr. Straight Guy, Mr. Long Hair?
Probably going more towards Mr. Longhair. I mean, politically active, going to D.C., going to Raleigh, getting involved, with some of the marches and demonstrations and speak-ins. And Duke went, there was a lot of disruption on campus, not as much as on others. Not really violent disruption, but just nonviolent demonstrations, and some of the buildings were occupied to the point where Duke actually called the semester and gave basically emptied out campus. You can all go home and your local police departments can deal with the problem. So they actually called the semester and gave everybody incompletes and all their coursework and sent us on our way. So I was also just starting to get in, had bought a guitar freshman year, so I was starting to play a lot of music. And, with the political atmosphere, it was just really, for me, it was impossible to concentrate on academic work at all. So, truth be told, sophomore year, Duke invited me to leave. And for academic reasons. And it was time for me to take a break anyway because I was being useless. So I took a year and a half off and left Durham for the first time, and ended up out in California, in Modesto, California, with my brother, and we worked for Del Monte in a cannery for a lot of that, for that first summer. And that was great because we lived 90 miles from San Francisco, so we could go into San Francisco on our time off and weekends and see groups in San Francisco. And at the time, the Dead were in one of their hiatus periods, but Jerry was playing with Old and In the Way back then. So it was a good place to be again. Modesto was not a terrific place. It was really, really hot, and we were working third shift in a cannery, so I can't say that it was the greatest situation. But it was nice being in California then also. So that was, like 70, 71, I guess. So stayed out the requisite time for Duke. Duke requires you to stay a certain amount of time out, and then came back down and got readmitted and got a little bit more serious about my studying and a lot more serious about my playing. So that's when I really started to get back into playing organized, with bands.
This is good. This is all good. This is
Well,
a great
it's
story.
enjoyable to remember because it really was an interesting time to be around.
We came up. Mary's theory
Mhm.
is that those 4 years, 69 to 73,
Mhm.
anybody who went to college then could not possibly
Avoid.
could not
Mhm.
concentrate on academics,
Right.
and that what was going on in the world affected
Mhm.
all of us.
Well, it's true that the education that we got was occurring much more outside the classroom. It was just very hard to be in a regimented classroom atmosphere because there were so many political and philosophical issues to discuss, and everyone was more than willing to do that. Now there's a certain reticence, I think, on the part of a lot of people to get in those kind of deep discussions because they so often lead to fisticuffs, or to just people fall out and sort of balkanize themselves into their own subsets of people that agree with them. And of course, a university exists to put people who disagree together, so they can see where their disagreements are and maybe mediate and negotiate and change their way of thinking. So it was a really invigorating time to be in college. And then, of course, I continued on at Duke in one way, either as a student or an employee, for a long time afterwards, and saw a lot of changes occur that I thought were very unhealthy in terms of academic atmosphere, but that's kind of a different,
Yeah, that's a whole,
that's a different
that's a
story.
whole different show, as
Yeah.
you say. Although, let's see, I think who was it that said that they thought Duke changed their emissions standards maybe during those years and really mixed it up more? And I don't think that's true. I think that
I think people were not quite as homogenous in general because the media was not, it didn't affect people as much. So I've been across the country by car several times. First time in 61, and then 63, and 67, and 71. Just, every few years I've been all the way out to California and back.
driving cars, motorcycles, vans, what were you doing? I'm just trying
The
to think.
time that I went out, after I flunked out of Duke and went out with my brother, that was in a van. A VW van, of course, How cliche. And the other, one time in a Datsun with no air conditioning and a hole in the floor this big, that was with Sally. That was after I left the theaters. But just, one way or the other. Some of them were family trips, once with my brother, a couple times, once with my parents, once with friends. I mean, it's just, different. But where I was going with this is every time I've been across, the entire country got more and more look-alike and talk alike and think alike. And, franchising had a lot to do with it, and the media has a lot to do with it. So at this point, when you talk about diverse, it's hard to get a diverse group of people from this country together. So Duke is very diverse in that they bring an international community together. But it's difficult to maintain that, to actually see the differences.
I think that's true. The long view, that is true. At the time, and again, those tender little years when everybody was so young and there were so many of us, and we had, the King assassination, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, and people walking on the moon, and
Right.
the war, and everything just seemed so much. I mean, I don't know what this generation particularly looks at for their big.
Yeah, where the
influences other than-
landmark occurrences.
Yeah, but all of those things were right there at that
Yeah.
time when we were all so impressionable and everything. I don't know. There's just something about that time.
Sure. And also there was, when the media picked up that the cultural explosion was a story, then of course that also got to be very big. I mean, the mainstream kind of picked up the whole, youth got to be an issue, and music got to be an issue, and dance, and all the rest of the arts, and media really started making that a news event. And that also affected all of us, I think, and there was a certain amount of pride in it, sort of being on the front edge of that.
Well, you were on the front edge. That's obvious. You were playing in bands, working hard in school, and I'm talking about like 71, 72,
Yeah.
and then you came back. Did you have a band, or were you'd go fill in with?
Well, I had bought a guitar freshman year. I bought a cheap Strat copy guitar from a guy in my dorm. So that was the first electric guitar that I had owned. And I had some friends in Chapel Hill at UNC, and who were also just really starting to get born with their guitars. So would go over and just spend hour after hour playing really horrendous music on electric guitars. You know, I mean, loud, lousy music, just trying to learn how to play them. And that was just, I had bought the guitar freshman year. I flunked out. Actually, they called the semester, what? How did they? No, they called school second semester freshman year. So I came back, finished my incompletes just barely, and got back for first semester sophomore year. And things had gotten quite psychedelic in the meantime, because like they were bringing in people like Moody Blues for concerts at Cameron, you know, which was terrific, you know, and light shows and stuff like that. But I was still just measling around on this guitar. When I got out of school, when I left school and went out to California, my brother actually bought a guitar in San Francisco when we were there. So again, we were just kind of noodling on guitars, not really being serious. When I finally got back at Duke, my brother had bought a bass guitar, and I bought his bass guitar. So it was a Hofner, which is the Beatle bass, really nice guitar, and started to actually play mostly like bluegrass. You know, that's the folk life festivals were at Duke, and I'm from, you know, being from the north, that's a kind of music that I hadn't heard a whole lot of. So I just really fell in love with bluegrass and that old classic country type stuff, you know, Johnny Cash stuff. And so that's the kind of music that I actually started playing on the bass. And it's really much easier to play that on the bass than to play Jefferson Airplane and Jimi Hendrix. So that's kind of how I learned my basic chops on the bass. And that's when I first met some of the people, or started hanging out with the people that, you know, I've continued with ever since. Billy Stevens and Roger and a guy named Mike Borstelman. We all played in this bluegrass group on the main quad at Duke. We called it Farmer's Almanac, I think. And that's the first time I had played actually, you know, stand up in public. And I got some pictures here. Actually, I've collected some pictures from back then too, if you can use those. But
Oh, good.
so that's
Farmer's Almanac.
I think it was called Farmer's
Was
Almanac.
Billy Stevens in that?
Billy Stevens was in it, and he had just started playing. No, he was always a harp player. I don't think he'd started playing piano yet. So he was harp, and I was bass, and Mike Borstelman was guitar, and there was a guy named Joffrey Jones, I think, that played banjo. Jay Cunningham might have been in it. So it was just the first time that we got a group together, learned a certain number of songs, and said, okay, now we can go play somewhere. And that's how it continued for years. There were communal houses that we would live in. I lived in between campuses in a house called African Violets on Swift Avenue. There was a house up the road called Monkey Top, and there was a house called Sunnyside, and they were all within a few blocks of each other, and there were just when I say a communal house, maybe 8 to 10 people would live in there, and almost everybody had some sort of craft or you know, art that they were pursuing. And so it was just this greater neighborhood where you could sit on your porch, and before you know it, 3 or 4 people would come and sit down and start to play music, and you could just do that all day, every day, in different combinations. So it was fun, but it was also a means of just playing all the time and kind of learning your instruments. So I stuck, even though I had the 6-string, I had gotten the bass, and I've always, like I said, sort of listened to the bass above all other players in a particular group. So I just decided to stick with that. Plus, there were far fewer bass players. And so I could always be assured of getting a lot of playing time, while all the guitarists were sitting there going, you know, take a number, you know, okay, I'll take the 10th break, you take the 11th break, that sort of thing. So it was good because I was always able to sit in and play, regardless of what group was playing.
Okay, Monkey Top.
Sunnyside, African Violets. Billy Stevens lived in I think it was an unnamed house, but he lived in a house with a couple of guys 2 blocks away. And it was the Durham Expressway hadn't been built yet, so, but they were clearing land for it. So that whole neighborhood was kind of broken up by the highway construction, which meant that they were just a mat of dead-end streets with no traffic, and you could, go walk up and down the street pretty much. It was a great neighborhood because it was ours, and it was embedded right in the middle of campus.
Is it still there?
Well,
Those places?
those places are still, African Violets was torn down. Duke came in and kind of bought up a lot of the neighborhood because it was right in between campus. It was attractive land for them, so they didn't really want to have it being controlled by local realtors and rental property and bums like us that were living in the rental houses. So they kind of cleared out the neighborhood. They tore down African Violets. Sunnyside and Monkey Top lasted quite a long time, but they had a lot of code violations. These are huge old mansions. I mean, basically these are mansion houses, and they developed a lot of code violations, and nobody was keeping them up. So they actually sold them to developers who redid them, and they're still. They moved Sunnyside up and situated it next to Monkey Top and redid it, and the brother of one of the soundmen from one of my bands owns it, and he's a doctor and has his office in there. So they're actually very nice houses, but it's not the same kind of community.
Have to do a drive-by.
Yeah, right. I'm surprised you hadn't heard of them because they were very long-running enterprises.
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen them. So.
And they were kind of the houses, if there was a concert at Duke, the band that played would often come over to one of the houses to, party or play music. So, I mean, we actually were able to, hear and play music with some of these folks too. So that was also part of the good mix.
Anybody you remember hearing or hanging out with or playing with?
Yeah, Kenny Loggins and Messina came. Actually, this was at a different communal house, which was off East Campus. I think it was called the Coke House because they had this big metal Coca-Cola sign on the front of it. They came over and Loggins played a bunch of music. I mean, he was up for playing. Joni Mitchell came over to Monkey Top. The Dead came over to one of the houses. Boz Scaggs and his band came to African Violets. So it was, you just don't get that anymore, You're lucky to be able to talk to and see the band off stage now. They're pretty insulated.
It's all very professional.
Mm-hmm.
Professional.
Yeah.
You doing good back there? Okay. How are you doing?
Fine.
Okay. How about the rest of the climate and again to set the stage before you really started to play with the Lisa Yannick
Mm-hmm.
group?
Well, I was
happening around in town. What other kinds of?
Let's see. I finally left Durham in '75. So after coming back, I'd finished my last 3 years at Duke. And what was going on? I had met Sally, so that was taking up a lot of my time.
No, wait, how did you meet? Was she here? Was she there?
She was a student also. She, when I came back for my second sophomore year, she was having her freshman year, I guess. Possibly. Anyway, we met pretty much through her coming over to these communal houses, and just hanging out there. We had a lot of common friends. And we also worked on what's called the Major Attractions Committee, which was the committee that booked all the bands that were coming to campus. So we got to know each other pretty well through that. And my roommate at the time took a liking to her roommate, so we ended up spending a lot of time together. So it all worked out very well. So
you went away.
Yeah, we got I graduated in May, got married in June, and moved almost immediately. I mean, I had to get a job, So we moved up to Worcester, Massachusetts, because I got a job working for RKO, Stanley Warner Theaters. And we went up to Worcester and ran a theater up there for a year and a half, and then I got transferred down to Connecticut, to Bridgeport, and ran a theater there, and actually became a district manager. So I was running theaters in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Westchester County, New York, and did that for another year and a half. And then the theater business was getting kind of shaky. When I started working in theaters was right after The Sound of Music. So The Sound of Music made theaters totally fat. I mean, they had more money than they knew what to do with, because that movie made more money than any movie had ever made. And RKO had the good luck or fortune or foresight to have booked that into like 2,000 of their theaters. So they were a really huge theater company, big exhibition company. They had huge theaters. They tended to be big all down the Northeast into Ohio, down into DC, and they owned a lot of the really fabulous large theaters. RKO theaters, which were still running from the 20s and 30s, and like my boss had run vaudeville theaters. So, but all good things come to an end. Then they were banking on musical movies, and the musicals were dying, so they were getting all these dogs in and really starting to go downhill, and they were closing a lot of their theaters. And so I could kind of see the writing on the wall that this company was going to get insolvent. Plus, it was really cold in New England, and we had been up there through some very cold years in New England. Plus, the oil prices had gone sky high. So in the time we lived there, I think like home heating oil had gone from 30 cents to like $1.25. And we just found it very expensive and uncomfortable. Sally's from Texas, and she kind of said, enough already, let's go south. So we moved back to Durham in the end of '79. And so in the meantime, a lot of the people that had stayed here had continued playing music and having bands. So Roger, long way around to sort of making the connection with somebody in Mobile City. Roger was the drummer in a band called Boney Maroney with Michael Borstelman, who I had played music with, and Billy Stevens, who I'd played music with, and a guy named Billy McCarthy, who had been a high school kid at Hillside High when we were in college, but he would hang out with us because he loved playing guitar, and we were all playing guitar all the time. So they asked me to be in that band, and that's so I started playing with them in 1980, and have sort of continued with them all the way till present. The problem was that Roger was playing with Mobile City, and Mobile City was a real band that was really out there and playing a lot and trying to get gigs and trying to get the best gigs. So they were booking themselves Friday and Saturday night, of course, and traveling out of town on weekends. So Boney's were relegated to trying to book Thursday nights, which back then clubs actually were doing. I mean, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they were trying to get live music. And it was okay. I mean, the crowds were okay on Thursday, but we were, Roger was really focused on Mobile City for all that time. And Bunnies were good. But we sort of got the midweek gig, which was not as good. And then at some point, I guess Mobile City kind of called it quits somewhere early in the 80s. And you'd probably, from having done the interviews, you probably know this dating better than I do. But at some point, we were able to start doing weekends as well. And that was nice.
Where were you playing? What were the places? What were the venues then?
We played a lot at the Hofbrau, which was underneath where the present-day Whole Foods is. It was a basement club, just a sandwich and beer type place. We played there quite a bit, and it was small, and we tended to really overcrowd it. So it was sometimes a little bit scary being in there because there was only one way out, and it was packed all the time. We played at Magdalena's, which was in Chapel Hill. We played at a couple times. It was late in the game, but we played down at the Pier in Raleigh, maybe once or twice. we did Duke gigs. We were kind of adopted by one of the fraternities at Duke, so we did a lot of their parties and formals and stuff.
What kind of music were you playing?
Oh, it was 90% Grateful Dead. It was actually, I ended up sort of terming it Fillmore rock. Would do Quicksilver and Dead and Jefferson Airplane, and just bands that were playing at or used to play at the Fillmore. Steve Miller, stuff like that. So that really was the bulk of what we did. It was definitely a jam band, and the way we would do it is we would never see each other practice. We'd just go to the gig and play. And we were very familiar with the music from having listened to it a million times since we were in high school. So generally speaking, if somebody could kind of talk through the chords and if somebody knew the words, we could do it. And once we did it once or twice, then we knew it. And then we could put it on the song list and let people request it. So we built up a pretty good song list that way.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I bet it was.
It was pretty fun. Yeah, it was really
By then,
fun.
Had you gone to a beard at any point, or were you still kind of?
No, actually, I was already a police officer. So I've actually missed a band in all of this. I was in a band called J.B. King back at Duke. After we had gone through sort of the bluegrass era, we started getting harder and harder, in terms of the music. So we actually had a rock group. I don't know if there was a band called Ed's Bush Band that was really, really popular and was very, they played a song list that I would have wanted to adopt and just play. So they broke up, their drummer was available. There were two guys that I had played a lot of acoustic music with in bluegrass bands and stuff. So we formed this rock band and really, it's the band that probably practiced the most. I mean, we really tried to learn songs, and so we learned enough to actually go out and book ourselves while I was still at Duke, and that was really just club gigs. There was a place down on 9th Street, Lower 9th Street, where they've just done the new building called The Place, and it was just 9th Street at that time was not Chi-Chi like it is now. It was definitely where the mill workers from the textile mill over at Irwin Mills would go and hang out, do their shopping and eat. I mean, it was like, the dry goods store and the grill and the this and the that. Well, the Place was the bar, and it was really not the place for Duke students, but we won them over by telling them that we played a lot of country music and then trying to play at least some stuff that they'd recognize. So we played one Johnny Cash song and one Merle Haggard song, and then when we got that out of the way, then by that time our friends and fans would come in, and then we could start playing Dead. So
What was the name of this band?
it was called J.B. King, and the name came from an ad for a pre-mixed cocktail that Hubline made. And Hubline, when they did these cocktails, would think of some, apocryphal story that went along that would explain the name. So J.B. King was allegedly a very wealthy millionaire who got embarrassed at having so much money during the Depression that he went on the road and started being a hobo and would travel around on the trains, and every train he rode, he would write this very fancy signature, J.B. King. And he supposedly was standing on, being in a hobo camp or something, and someone shared a drink called the Hobo's Wife. And I may have misstated this. The name of the cocktail was Hobo's Wife. The man who supposedly marketed it was J.B. King. So he's playing a hobo. Somebody gives him this drink. He says, "What's that?" "It's a hobo's wife." So he puts it in a bottle, and the rest is history. It's Hubline, and he's going to add to his millions. Anyway, that's J.B. King. So that was the band that I was in when I was finishing up Duke. And actually, there was one more before I left Duke, because I actually got into a acoustic group named, yeah,
check out that J.B. King story. So you had, okay, so you had one more band?
Well, the J.B. King broke up, as all bands do, and we got together. I'm trying to remember if this was before or after. Anyway, there was a, let's see, I'm mulling this over. At some point, someone came to African Violets with a bass fiddle, a regular stand-up string bass. Don't ask me why they were traveling with a bass fiddle, but they left it there. And so I could play bass, so I started to fiddle around with that. And we ended up, me and Billy Stevens, Mike Borstelman, and Marcy Kramish put together an acoustic group called Quill Gordon. And the venue that we played at mostly was Sometime. So that's the first time that I had sort of gotten in we had gone to Sometime restaurant to eat a lot, but we actually ended up playing quite a bit of music there, played there regularly. And that was an acoustic group, straight acoustic. But for some reason, at some point, we decided to try to make it electric. So we did one gig in Baldwin Auditorium as an electric group. We got a drummer. I traded, got rid of the string bass and played the regular bass, that bass. And we did one electric gig in Baldwin for Joe College weekend or something. And that was actually the precursor of Boney Maroney. So that was in 75. Then I left for almost 5 years. When I came back, Boney Maroney actually had become a group and was playing. And so I kind of rejoined them, but it wasn't really Boney Maroney when it started.
Okay, so that gets us to the Mobile City Band, more or less.
Well, yeah, 10 years later.
Were you with them when they did the Star Search?
No.
Okay.
No,
So,
there's many years before I got into Mobile City.
okay. Oh, really?
Yeah, because, my band was really the Bonies for all of the 80s. And most of the 90s.
Oh.
What happened, the way I got hooked back up was that I went to see them when they did their reunion at the Eno. And Dev Palmer, who's a neighbor of mine, he actually lives down the street here, was playing bass with them. And we saw them out at the Eno Festival, and they were great. And I remembered them from, it's not like I'd never heard them before, because we had gone to see them. I went to see them as a fan back, I guess, when they were still playing in the 80s. But they were playing pretty infrequently, or I went to see them infrequently, because they were either on the road or they just didn't play. They weren't playing around much. And I really had, you have to understand that my time, I kind of have my foot in two different worlds, with my work and the music. So it was hard to find time to go out on weekends. And a lot of times I was working weekends because of the nature of my work.
Which I want to talk about, because we haven't even talked about the fact that how in the world did you get into law enforcement?
Yeah.
And what job did you have? You want to talk about that first?
Sure.
How did you? What did you do? What was your job?
When I was working in the theaters, like I said, RKO had a lot of downtown theaters, inner city theaters. And so there was a lot of criminal activity that I ended up getting in the middle of just because I was running a business in inner city areas. So, we were having, cars broken into around the theaters. We had people kidnapped from our parking lot while leaving the theaters. I had a projectionist murdered in my theater. We had a lot of little gang type kids that would hang around and give you trouble. So I would try to hire them to do work to try to co-opt them a little. Either have them, hire them as ushers sometimes, or hire them to, clean up the parking lot or something like that. And so I had a lot of exposure to the local police because of the nature of my job. And they would come and do like money escorts at the end of the night, take me to the bank. And I got to know some of the cops pretty well. I had kids of cops working for me. And, again, this is back in the late 70s, and it was, it was kind of hot still. I mean, especially up around Southern Connecticut, New Haven, Bridgeport. Um, so, yeah, I just started to admire them pretty much. Plus, when we were living in Bridgeport, we had gotten broken into several times. So, the detectives would come out and I'd watch them work and kind of try to figure out what they were doing and stuff. So I found their work interesting. Plus, I found them to be admirable people. And plus, I was actually doing police stuff. I mean, I was breaking up fights and taking weapons away from people and, chasing down people who had broken into stuff. So I was kind of doing stuff anyway. And when I came back down here to Durham, I just kind of said, well, if I would do it anyway, maybe I could do it for a living. And I had a housemate from African Violets, actually, who in my 5-year absence, had become a cop at Duke University. And she said, it was really interesting work, and she would tell me about the training and all of that. So again, she was piquing my interest. So when I came back down looking for work, I started applying at police departments. And my vision wasn't good enough to get hired in Durham City. But I got hired at Duke. And, I just found that it was something that I could do and was good at.
Were you like a boot?
Well, I started out as just a regular uniform patrol cop. And didn't do that for very long, maybe a year and a half. And then I made detective. And so I was a detective for a little over 8 years. And then I applied for and actually got hired as the chief of police in the medical center at Duke. And stayed an executive for the rest of the time that I was there through the 90s. So, and then, at the end of it's very difficult to maintain that job. The average tenure in the United States for a police chief is 5 years, and I actually lasted 10. So I guess that I should be, proud of having made it. But at some point, the political pressures and the heat and the dissatisfaction and the desire to change course or whatever eventually takes over. So Duke and I kind of fell out of love. And that's when I switched over to the city as a planner, which is a civilian position. So I stayed on a little bit. In North Carolina, you can maintain a police commission by working part-time as a reserve or in some other capacity like that. But even that time commitment just got to be too much. And frankly, after all this time, I just got real tired of being back in uniform. To be a reserve, you got to work uniform and do really the scut work of a police department a lot of times because you're a part-timer and they're not paying you. So they just, assign you to do all sorts of things that nobody really in their right mind would want to do. I got tired of going, out to the range and all of that sort of thing. So I resigned my commission. So I'm not a police officer anymore.
Do you miss that?
There are obviously parts of it that I miss. I mean, I really enjoyed being a detective. There's a lot of satisfaction in working a case and actually resolving it and having a direct effect on bringing something to a satisfactory conclusion and maybe bringing a little bit of justice to somebody and doing the right thing for the victim. So that was pretty enjoyable.
Yesterday on public radio, I was driving in midday, and the topic was security for students on campus at Duke. Did you listen?
Was it the Sue Waslick thing? Yeah, I listened to a little of that, and it was, I have to confess, nothing personal, Sue, but I have said the same lines a million times. I could have done the show in my sleep. I mean, that is the line. A lot of what she said is the line. It's all exactly true, and it all doesn't mean a thing because the kids are going to come. They're going to be absolutely driven by impulse. They're going to put themselves in jeopardy. They're going to be victims, and when that happens, they're going to turn right back around and say, why didn't you keep this from happening? Or what are you going to do about this? So, yeah, I mean, it's very predictable. It's a predictable cycle. And you have to understand, when you're working with the college population, you just have to go into it eyes wide open and realize that that in fact is going to happen. Reboot.
Let's go back to music.
Okay.
Back to Mobile City. Okay, you said you went out and listened to them. Do you have any memory of what your impressions were? We saw a poster that was in the scrapbook
Uh-huh.
that was, tonight, Mary Rocap in like this giant type with Charlie Evil and Lisa Yannick. And
That's
Lisa
funny.
Was like way
Uh-huh.
funny. She was just really getting
Uh-huh.
started. Later, they, sort of changed the whole thing. It became a true band.
Do you remember the year?
I guess that was like 80. I don't know.
I remember seeing them. I think it was at some time, or it may actually have even been earlier than that when it was the Bluebird. I can't remember if it was that long ago, but I remember seeing them. It was probably the first time I had seen them. Didn't know them. I mean, I didn't know them personally, but there was a guy named Chris Turner, who's another harp player, who played with the Ningy Band. And I remember he was sitting in, or maybe they were just doing something together, and he played a note on the harp that sort of set up this resonant frequency in my legs to the point that I almost fell down. It was just like this unbelievably high, loud note that was just, for all its clarity and everything, just almost took my legs out from under me. And I remember sitting there, I think Sally was with me, and I said, did you hear that? She said, well, no. And I said, it almost knocked me over. And just then, Lisa hit a note singing that was exactly the same note that had the exact same effect on me. And it was kind of like her voice almost knocked me over. And I thought that was pretty impressive, because I'm generally not, I'm the guy that listens to the bass, so I'm sitting there going, listening to the bass. And it's the first time, that I had been really cognizant of hearing a singer, it's certainly a local singer, that had those kind of pipes. So that was really impressive. I think I might have also gone to see them over at the station. And it's a shame that I don't have a better memory of it, but a lot of those years were kind of wipeouts for me. So, but I remember them more because of the song list. I can kind of relate what I had heard to the song list that they play, and realize, oh yeah, that was Mobile City. I wasn't real familiar with the band. It was just kind of, we would go out and say, I wonder who's playing here, sort of thing. But then played with Charlie a little bit, just jamming off and on. And, of course, Roger and I were continuing to play. Mary and I ended up playing in a couple other bands, the Flashbacks and the Elvis Band. And so I got to know Mary a little bit better, because I didn't really know Mary that well from back then either. And
with Bill Henderson?
yeah, with Bill Henderson, yeah. Quite a hoot. And actually Shannon, I knew pretty well way back when, in the early 70s, because the guy that I had learned how to play guitar with over at UNC ended up being in a band with her. She was a singer for South Wing, which was a really popular Chapel Hill band back then. And so I've known Shannon the longest, probably known Roger the best, just because we have played a lot of music together. And got to know the others, Anne, I've been shopping at Wellspring since the day it opened, but never really made the connection with her until I got in the band. So it's been, the best thing about the band has been getting to becoming good friends with all these people. I'm kind of regretting the fact that I wasn't around constantly enough back then, certainly not in the music scene, because during that sort of crucial 5-year period I was gone. And then when I came back, I was really focused on the work and not the music. The music has always been more a way for me to recover from work.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I think we probably talked about this during the recording session some, but when you go to one of your shows, it seems like your audience is all, sort of gray-haired 50s types, and they get out there on the floor and they think they're 19 again somehow. Something
Right.
happens when you're
Right.
hearing that music. And my experience has been watching you all in the band. It feels like you all think you're 19 again too.
Oh,
And I
no
just
two
thought,
ways about it. Oh,
is
yeah,
that what it's
that's,
like?
yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us, certainly back then, would ever go, geez, when I'm 52, I'll probably still be playing rock and roll music. And I know that I don't look in the mirror now and just go, who am I kidding? What am I doing this for? Get real. In fact, I just bought a new guitar. So, and I bought, my new amp when I was 40. I mean, that was my 40th birthday present to myself, is to finally buy decent equipment. So it doesn't seem to be changing at all. I mean, I don't feel like we're aging. I certainly know we look like we're aging, but I don't think we're not acting our age. I hope not, at least. And it's true that the audience kind of comes with you, and they take this as an opportunity to ignore the fact that they're all getting a little long in the tooth, which is fine with us. I mean, as long as we can still do it. I don't look at it as a defiant thing, that sort of, I'm going to rock till I die, man. It's more just, it's just so natural to go out and play this music, and to play music, in some cases, that may have been playing for 30 years or 35 years or who knows. We can still make it sound fresh. We certainly have a new approach to playing some things. Actually, slowing down is a good thing in a lot of respects. Over the year, with Bonies, it was a race to see who could play the most notes. I mean, we would just be flashing all over the place, and which has its appeal to me also. I mean, you can end up making some pretty good music, but actually slowing down and paying a little bit more attention to what you and the others are playing has been a good exercise, and I know it's made me a better musician in a lot of ways. Because it has shown me the complexity of what you end up playing. Rock and roll is not necessarily simple. There's a lot that goes into it. Even if you're playing a 2-chord song, it's how you play the 2 chords and put them together, and the dynamics and the words behind them and all that are really important. And so what I've done over the years is just really try to listen to what I'm playing more, rather than, say, hey, look at this, I can play really fast. So that's been a good experience.
What hasn't been a good experience?
Well, actually, there are some things about gigging that don't appeal to me. The prep time, the early arrival, the waiting. Most of the time, the places you play are not strictly the most comfortable places to spend time. It's pretty time consuming. The performance side of it is time consuming. For those 2 hours that you're actually playing, there is a little price to pay, and that does not appeal to me. So that's a downside to the performance. Lugging the equipment around, I mean, like an idiot. Of course, on my 40th birthday, I buy something that weighs 125 pounds that I have to now lift and carry and toss on the trucks and get onto a stage. So
are you saying you would be just as happy if you were just jamming on the weekends and not really performing for an audience?
I would be, yeah. I going out to Jay's and practicing is pure enjoyment to me. The music is good, it sounds good. Visiting with the people, the social aspect of it is absolutely what keeps me playing music. I'm not really a born performer. I'm maybe one of the reasons I picked up bass is that a bass player tends to be a little bit in the background and more anonymous, and that actually appeals to me. I'm not a front person at all. They keep trying to throw me solos, and it's just like, no, that's okay. I don't see that as my role, and actually I'm not comfortable doing that.
I think it's honest. That's an honest.
Well, I've had to think a lot about it because there is an opportunity to perform a lot. I mean, I could pick up the phone and put 4 or 5 people together right now, and we could practice 2 or 3 times and go find gigs. But that isn't necessarily what I want to do. Certainly the money isn't at all and never has been. I mean, I've lost so much money playing music over the last 30 years, it's ridiculous. The investment has no return monetarily. But the performing has its moments, but I don't crave it like a lot of other people do. I mean, when we were starting to play, you know, what would happen is we'd come in and set up in this place. You know, we'd go to someone's house and set up a complete band, drums and all, in whatever room was the largest. Actually, I've played in kitchens before. We've set up, you know, putting the PA speakers up on refrigerators and stuff and just playing to the entire house. And, you know, and so you're not going to see more than 10 people at a time when you do it that way. So you don't feel like you're performing. That's fine with me. You know, if I can, sometimes we go, Bonies were kind of a performers band because the musicians were really good. Billy McCarthy's a fabulous guitar player and Billy's a fabulous harp player. And, you know, it was really nice to watch just one person in the audience paying attention to what one of us may have been playing and saying, oh, well, that's appreciation. So I guess it's a little bit more microscopic level of looking at performance. You know, if I can appeal to one person, and actually we've had plenty of opportunities to just play to that many people. I mean, Roger probably gave you an inkling of some of the gigs we've played to 5 people, 1 person. But as long as the band's having a great time, it doesn't really matter. So I never got terribly down at a small crowd because if the music was good and you were still enjoying each other, that was fine. That was all that I needed to get out of it.
Well, it does seem with the Mobile City Band, and I know you said you might be a little different because you're newer.
You heading out? See ya.
She gone?
Yeah, she has a book club
Oh,
that she
bye.
goes
Oh,
to.
what are you reading tonight? What book are you doing?
Well, tonight we're doing The Left Hand of Darkness,
Oh.
which is a science fiction book that was mentioned in another book that we read. So we're jumping.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Great neighborhood here. It's all neighborhood.
Wow. Book
So,
club, neighborhood book club.
Book club, block parties, neighborhood listserv. I mean, this is a really tight neighborhood.
That's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have children?
No.
Never.
Never have.
What I was asking you about, I was trying to get back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you might be a little bit different from the other members of Mobile City Band.
Yeah.
Because you came to it new, because you came to it from maybe over here. Some of them have been married to each other. Some of them are very.
Yeah, I mean, they have been, I think, friends for a long time. Friends and and relatives for a long time. I've been in the community of crossed paths with them, I've rubbed elbows with them for a long, long time, but I had never really gotten to know them until I started playing with the band.
So how tight is that group? And you are part of that.
Oh,
group.
it's-
I mean, what's going on there? Who are those people? Each other?
Well, actually, that's a very interesting question. It's so easy. The music, everything with them is effortless. I went and practiced with them, you know, a couple times before we went out to play, and it was just easy to step in. There is no ego conflict, which if you've been in rock bands, you know, I mean, like Spinal Tap is not really satirical. It's absolutely true. I mean, you can get in such horror shows and bands, and I've been fortunate over the years to get in bands where it's been easy. This one really has a social element to it that is just the most totally relaxing to be with them and to play music with them. And I think that probably is the same way that they would feel, you know, to each other. It's just like going to your best friend's living room and sitting down and actually what it is it's just like being on the porch back at African Violets 30 years ago with people that you lived with, and people dropped by and nobody was trying to prove anything, but it all came out great at the end. That the company would be terrific, but to add the music on top of it is the icing on the cake, because the music is fabulous. The group is so professional that the music comes out right and with very little struggle. So, it sort of takes the angst element of rock out of it. It's just like it's all the best elements are still in there. And for the kind of music we play and for the kind of audiences that we play for, that's fine. We don't have to have a hard edge on it. In fact, we don't want a hard edge on it. We want it to be really energetic and powerful when it needs to be powerful, but it doesn't have to have an attitude,
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the experience that's what's coming out on the stage. Now, how about the reason we got involved in this to start with was because you all were making a record of where the band was or is right now, and we have that record now. I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of new material on that particular CD.
To say the least. I mean,
but what was
that was a little. Well, it was. Until it actually started happening, it sure was not what I thought was going to happen. I mean, I thought that we would, when we started to talk about doing a live recording, and then doing a good production of that live recording, and I thought, that's great. We can certainly do that. We had done a really good gig in March or whenever that was, that Mike Gallimore had recorded, and there were some parts on that I just thought were really, really great music. There were parts that were some of the best music I thought that I'd played. So I thought, this is going to be like rolling off a log. We'll just go out there and we'll play music that we're familiar with and can do. So then, I don't know if it was a need or this urge to put the songwriting out front, or whether it might have even had sort of a financial element in that we realized that to pay royalties on cover songs would get very, very expensive. Whatever the motivation, here come these six or eight, I can't even remember, 7 or 8 new songs, brand new songs. And so we're throwing these songs together, and we're, at every practice we're changing them a little, and maybe changing the chord progressions, maybe changing the rhythm, changing the sequence, changing the breaks, changing changing that, to the point where, and we're getting closer and closer to the point that we're actually going to go in the studio. And we're practicing a lot of times without Roger, because Roger was going through, Annie's situation. So that I just didn't really feel that we were learning the stuff to the point that we could presume to put it on a CD. So then we go out there and it's kind of like going into the big game, the World Series, and you just go, geez, I sure hope that I'm going to be the MVP and make all the great catches and win the game and all that. And you try not to think that maybe what's really going to happen is you're going to strike out 40 times and, run into a wall and hurt yourself. But, we get out to the gig, and it was kind of a big production, like nothing I'd ever been through. And I think I mentioned that I'm much happier being kind of in the back and anonymous, and here come the boom cameras and the makeup and the production truck and the producers. And, and I have to admit that I was sort of, near paralyzed with self-consciousness. I mean, it's just not my way of doing things. And then, we did the gig, and I just didn't think that I played well at all. Mortified, actually, with my performance. And kind of distraught. And we played, and I think we went over to Ann's house 3 nights later. At some point, we got the rough recording and went over and listened to it. And it's not that my worst fears were realized, but I just really was not happy with. I was mainly not happy with myself. I mean, I remember being on stage and thinking every time I strike this string, there's a financial risk. because I knew that there was a lot riding on it and would only get one chance. So it was really nerve-wracking, really nerve-wracking. As it turns out, because I'd never recorded before, I didn't realize that a good production can erase a lot of mistakes and put mistakes in the background. You can actually fix stuff. And when I finally heard the finished product, I'm really, really happy with it. I mean, I thought not only did the music sound good, but the production itself was a total knockout to me. It had production complexity. The production was just so fine, and I'm really proud of it now, even though maybe I didn't play some of the notes that I'm hearing on it. No, I played some of those notes, but maybe not in the order that they ended up on the CD. But anyway, it was an excellent production, and I'm really, really happy that I got to go through it. I mean, it was a great experience. I learned a whole lot. Spending time with Mark was, just like studying at the master's knee. I went out and spent a night at the Fidelatorium doing some of the mixing, mainly on the acoustic songs, which I hadn't even heard before. I mean, when I was hearing them for the first time when we were mixing them, and it was just, that was a high point. Musical life, that's the high point of my musical life, was sitting in there with this fabulous equipment. Mitch Easter's place, for crying out loud, and working on mixing the stuff and hearing how good you could make it sound. And it was just terrific experience. Maybe I'll do it again someday. But it really was kind of painful to go through. I mean,
Sorry about that.
no, I mean that's me.
It's okay. I can't wait for you to see the video version
Yeah.
of that because you look so good.
Oh, good.
So I'm just telling you,
I was sweating it from start to finish, believe you me.
Did you have a question, Jay? You have.
No, I'm just thinking it's too bad that, I guess if you could do it again, if they could have showed you all how much could be done after the fact.
Yeah, I was being extremely restrained, for one thing. I mean, I with this band, and I understand that the vocals are the focus of this band.
Yeah.
So I really, really try hard not to do what I would do with the Bonies, which is step all over them, crush them, and drown them out. But on that night, because I was so self-conscious about the consequences of everything I was playing, it was just I didn't play naturally. I didn't play unrestrainedly, and I didn't really even play, I didn't think I was doing the music justice. Plus, they were all brand new songs that would never performed in public before, which is, about the weirdest thing that I've ever tried to do is let's go play a bunch of new songs for the first time on tape. So it was it was difficult.
Well, I hope you will do it again then.
Yeah.
Because you deserve another shot.
Yeah,
But I think
right.
it's great. I thought your stuff was great. I don't think they reordered your bass notes. I'm sorry.
I didn't get to work much on my own stuff. Actually, when they did the fixes, the bass fixes on the live stuff, I didn't have much input. They did a good job on it, but
You weren't in there?
I haven't gone back and listened to the rough tape since we previewed it. It would be interesting to go back and listen to it again and just kind of hear what I was doing. I mean, in all honesty, I've listened to a lot of old tapes. I think I mentioned I was putting them all together, and you want to talk about some stinko music. I mean, I've certainly produced it in my lifetime, but it was always, totally live, and once you've played it, it's over, and no one's ever going to listen to that mistake again. But the idea of having people really analyze in detail was really intimidating to me. In fact, I remember asking Lisa before we did the thing whether she wanted to get somebody else to do the live recording. because I didn't really. I just know that there are better bass players than me, so you know. It was a different context than doing a live gig live. You know, it's kind of like if you're going to go in the studio, get the best you can get.
Yeah, but that really wasn't, that's not what this band is about. That's
Right.
what the
And in
experience was,
retrospect, and like I said, having gone on through this, I can see that it was more important to do the band as it is and was, and actually warts and all, and just say, hey, you know, that's us. You know, that's fine.
Did it, the other thing about this recording that I think is unique,
Mhm.
or one of the things that's unique, is that friends and community put the money together to make it
Mhm.
happen. And we haven't talked to everybody about that,
Right.
but from sort of over here where you are, just looking at the community, does that kind of thing happen in Durham a lot? Do people come together for a creative venture? Do that? I mean, is that
I've
is it
never
unique?
seen it on that kind of scale or with that kind of speed, with that kind of enthusiasm. I mean, some people, there's pretty good support for the arts in Durham, I think. There's a very interesting and wide-ranging local arts community. But in terms of a personal project, you know, and this is a pretty personal project, to have other people buy into it with the kind of enthusiasm that they did is, well, first off, I think that it's a great compliment, you know, to Lisa and to the band. But I just think that I kind of hope that people did it because they wanted to also have a little piece of the past come back. And because all of us at the time certainly didn't have the funding to do that kind of project back then, and really a lot of our memories are being, you know, are alive on these old cassette tapes that were recorded on, you know, in our case on a single track reel to reel, and have snaps and pops, and you know, and in some cases, you know, we would drop the tape and it would roll out and it would turn over and would have to reconstruct. I mean, the recordings are great, but it's nice to have this recording that certainly evokes the past, but is also as good sounding as it was then live. You know, I mean, it's great to be able to reproduce that and to say, oh, this you know, this really is. I remember listening to this. You know, so that's an accomplishment, and the fact that so many people contributed to it as generously as they did is just great. You know, it's a community group effort.
Well, that's why we want to shine a light
Uh-huh.
on the community in telling the story, because it
Right.
isn't just
Mhm.
Lisa's story. It isn't just the Mobile City story. I mean, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much bigger story, and I think you've helped us kind of
Yeah.
fill in some of those gaps. But there are a couple more things I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
I know about a million things I'd like to talk to you about. I know we can't be here all night. So, who you are now,
Mhm.
you're retired. What,
I
what do you
wish.
do- well, what do you do? What do you do on a, you know?
On a daily basis. The planner for the police department. Actually, what happens here is that when I left Duke and was looking for employment, I knew Nick Tennyson, who was the mayor at the time, pretty well, and I had worked on a Chamber of Commerce committee with him back when I was still at Duke. Didn't know Teresa Chambers well, but knew her a little bit. She was the chief of police then, and I was just looking for a job, and my attitude with job searching has been, don't just look for the jobs that are there, but create a job and go sell the need for the job. So I actually wrote this proposal and sort of floated it through Nick that for a person to coordinate volunteers and retired law enforcement or interested people to supplement the investigators at the city police department, because the investigators are tremendously overworked. I mean, there's nowhere near the kind of staffing to address crime in this city that we need. So I thought, well, maybe somebody should try to put together a group, even people like me that knew how to do an investigation. Not really, don't go out and take homicides and, violent crimes, but there's this huge pool of nonviolent crimes and minor crimes that nobody has the time and attention to give to. So that's actually the way that I floated it to Chief Chambers. Well, a little time went on, and it kind of went to nowhere. And then a guy that I knew in the police department had apparently had a conversation with the chief, and she said, find out, what else he might be interested in doing. So they did have a job that was called planner, that was charged with doing research and staff studies and researching new products, new weapons, things like that. So it came open, and I did interview for the job and ended up getting the job. And then immediately, of course, Chief Chambers leaves the department. So what I had been hired to do initially was really more a staff support kind of position that would do research and analysis and projection, strategic planning, and all of that sort of thing. What it's morphed into is someone who is an administrative jack of all trades, I guess. I was trying hard not to actually supervise anyone, because I've supervised so many people in my life, and that's the thing that will give you gray hair faster than anything else. But I ended up getting assigned different units to manage. So I do fleet, I do the quartermaster function, I do accreditation, I have facility, the entire facility program, including lease negotiations, acquisition and design of space, space allocation. I do major procurements, and then on the side I do strategic planning and the long range plan and all of that sort of thing. So it's a really diverse bag of administrative responsibilities. And it's, I'm not going to toot my horn, but it's about 3 jobs. So I'm having trouble doing the 3 jobs well, but I'm keeping my head above water. It's
so not retired.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting phenomenon in police departments that you have sworn officers, the guy on the beat. And everybody wants as many sworn officers in uniform, in police cars, out on the street that they can get, because that's what makes the community, that's the visibility that makes the community feel good and safe. And unfortunately, it's a $36 million business, and you can't just have a bunch of people running around on the street. So, you have to build an administrative function to the police department. But how do you identify the managers in a police department? Well, a lot of times it's the guy that runs fastest and makes the most arrests and writes the most tickets. And, when you talk about your performance indicators as a cop, you're talking about operational performance. Who solved the most cases? Who answered the most calls. So it's hard to build a management expertise in a police department, because generally what you're reinforcing and rewarding are all these operational indicators. So I was different in that I had already been in business before I became a cop, because I was running theaters. So I approached it more from a business standpoint, that I realized and had, gave full acknowledgement that it's a business with a huge budget, and we are beholden to, at Duke we are beholden to different forces, but certainly in the city you have to think about everything as a taxpayer. And so what's happened is, again, sort of because I could do it, a lot of administrative responsibility just sort of accrued to me because first off, I was willing to do it because I wasn't sworn anymore, so I wasn't looking to jump in a car and go answer a car with a blue light anymore. But there's not a lot of people like me in policing. You know, there's not a lot of people who are business minded who go into policing because why would you? You don't make any money. So if you're going to be a successful businessman, go, do an MBA. But the problem is that I just enjoy it too much. So
You must
yeah.
love it.
yeah,
You
it's
must be really
I,
good at it.
and I also obviously there's an element to it that it's a worthwhile profession, that you do good, so. And that's probably a carryover from the 70s where, I'd much rather have a profession that's service oriented than profit oriented. So
That brings full circle back to what we've been talking
mm-hmm.
to so many of the people in the community about, and that is that there was something about that particular time that made us all want to be better people,
mm-hmm.
not necessarily be accomplished or successful, but we wanted the world to be a better place,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that.
And look out for each other.
Exactly.
Which actually gets me back to something I mentioned earlier that I forgot about. Jay Miller was running it wasn't called the Music Loft then, I think it was called the Music Service, a music store on 9th Street. And I was already a detective. And I knew Jay probably from music. Actually, I've thought about it, and I can't remember where I met Jay, but I knew Jay from the music store, possibly from being a customer. I can't remember if we had played music together already. I have to believe we did, but I just don't remember. Anyway, he calls me up and says, something very weird just happened. There was a cop in here pricing a soundboard and kind of trying to sell it to me. And I just thought that was kind of odd because it was like a 16 track or something pretty sizable. So I said, well, let me come out and look at it. So I came out and looked at it, and it just so happened that I had seen that board in the police headquarters downtown. I had been downtown doing something down in the Durham Police Department that morning, and I had seen the mixing board in the investigative section. It had been seized in a search warrant. So I thought, why is this cop trying to sell something that had just been served in a search warrant? So I was a very fresh detective, and I was also a Duke, and this involved the Durham Police Department. I was kind of nervous about approaching them about the possibility that somebody was going bad on them. So I actually called a guy that later ended up being my first boss when I went to work at the city just 5 years ago, and he was a fraud investigator, and we kind of got into it and started looking at it, and it really did appear as if there was a little bit of impropriety going on. Long story short, the cop got leery, came out, picked it up. There was actually no crime occurred, but he later did do something along the same lines and ended up getting him terminated. But it was really interesting because here's, Jay Miller and I, in a professional capacity working, and then 20 years later, here we go again playing in the band. So it's just, like I said, I've sort of kept my foot in two different worlds, and it's been odd in that respect. But music's my therapy, so.
Well, that answers a question I was going to ask about how, well, it doesn't really, how important is the music in this life that you've carved out for yourself?
It is really essential from the standpoint of being my primary relaxant and, certainly my main hobby. I've never thought of myself as a professional musician because I never tried to make it my profession. I never, at any point in playing, did I think, gee, maybe I should do this for a living. I mean, it was so ridiculous to even go down that road that I've always thought of it just being sort of my hobby, and of myself as being a hobbyist musician rather than a pro. And that's why it's been really fun hanging with people that I consider professionals. A lot of the people I play with are, music is much more than a hobby for them. and they're really great musicians. And it's sometimes I just go, gee, I wonder when they're going to find out that I'm not. You know, it's like got to keep my hand in here, but it's like sometimes it's just kind of like you know, I feel that I'm running as fast as I can to keep up, but that's fine. I mean, I don't mind pushing myself.
I've just got a couple more things. Who do you listen to? And besides the Mobile City Band, who do you listen to?
I actually a lot still listen to classical music. I mean, I if I'm in the car, I'm primarily listening to classical. If I'm going to put on, you know, like music, I listen to. Well, I guess I could be just specific in, as I think of it. There's a band called Nickel Creek that I listen to a lot and think are great. And actually, Chris Thile, who's the mandolin player, he started when he was a kid, so I've listened to some of his old stuff when he was like 13, 12 years old or something, you know. So they're great. And so they still have sort of a bluegrass approach to things, but it's much more complex. It's more like Bela Fleck type music. I listen to Bela Fleck a lot. Still listen to the Dead, though not as much as I used to, just because it's kind of hard to find fresh music by them. Listen to some female singers like Nancy Griffith. I listen to a lot. I like Natalie Merchant a lot. Eric Clapton I listen to a lot and play actually with my new guitar. That's what I've been playing along with his stuff a lot, just because it's kind of the right guitar for that. Just I don't know, you know, Jackson Browne, Steve Miller. I just bought 2 Steve Miller albums just because I didn't have them any longer and I could find them.
I see that whole stack of albums. Not
Yeah.
many people still listen.
Yeah, you know, still have a turntable. I a lot of the stuff that I've had for years and years is just about unlistenable. I mean, it's just been so abused over time. But if I can find a fresh copy of stuff that I used to own, I'll buy a new one and throw the old one away. I don't know. I listen to a lot of big band music, actually. I listen to, you know, Dorsey and Duke Ellington. I like some piano music. I listen to Fats Waller. Just, I have a whole lot of different moods. I'm the Tito Fuentes, Patsy Cline. I don't know. Just whatever appeals to me.
You've got a lot of moods.
Yeah, yeah.
We've asked everybody this, and this may be putting you on the spot, but do you have a
Wait, should I do this
No,
now?
no, no. No, if you were a tree, that must be done it. Do you have any particular philosophy that, I mean, you know, we're at a stage of life now where we can really start to sort of look at things
Mm-hmm.
with meaning,
Mm-hmm.
if we want to. But is there anything, either a lyric, poetry, any quote, anything that just, you know, that comes to
Well,
you?
you actually included that in your mailing way back when you said that you were gonna, you know, be starting these interviews, and the best way I can answer it is that I am not lyrically bound. You've noticed that in this band of 10 people, I'm the only one who doesn't sing. And generally speaking, words are not my medium. So first, and one of the reasons is that I have no memory for words. And being extemporaneous is kind of my mode. If I've said it, I'll never repeat it, or will tend to avoid repeating it. If I say something and someone says, "Oh, you said the funniest thing the other day. What was that?" Even if I remember, I won't. I just can't repeat it. It's kind of like it has to be fresh. So what happens with words is they generally, sort of come at me, and I hear them, and the moment is fine, and then they pass me and go somewhere else, and I wait for the next one. And I just, when I'm playing music, I tend to listen to the actual melody and the music. Maybe it's because I spend a lot of my time playing classical music, orchestral music, and I tend to listen to the music, but I don't hear words. And it gets almost to the absurd stage, like I can't remember the lyrics to Christmas carols. So I have to say that I don't hang my hat generally on that kind of the phrases or the poetry or anything. So
You're a great talker.
well, it's all just coming right out, and it'll never come out again.
It's okay. Great conversation though, and that's fine. That
Yeah.
You don't have anything. You've given us a lot, but is there anything? And I'd like for us to keep talking, but I also know we want to shoot some, like this dead poster over here and a couple of other
Yeah.
things. Can we do that? Yeah. Okay. But is there anything else about the band experience, about Lisa? Do you want to talk about Lisa?
Lisa's been the thing that really impresses me about Lisa is that she knows she is a musical leader. I mean, she knows exactly where she wants to go with things. She knows what it should sound like to her. She's very good at giving direction to get that. But she's so easy to get along with, So I've been in bands where there are strong personalities who are obviously the leader of the band that, frankly would drive me out of the band. And, this is just a case where I respect her musical instincts so well that, it's just like, however you want it, if that wasn't right, I'll try something else. So I've really tried to approach this from the standpoint of, trying to make her sound as good as she can sound because she's so important. It's important to do that for this band. So it's been fun getting to know her because she's pretty unassuming, but she's totally talented. So that's a good combination. And it's she has charisma and can really be the focus of all the energy. She'll take it all, which is fine because I certainly don't want it on me.
I think you get a lot of it. I don't know.
Yeah, every one of them in that band. I mean, they do stuff. Jay wrote those songs, and they're just professional songs. Lisa's written songs, they're professional songs. Charlie, they'll suggest something to Charlie, and Charlie will kind of, he'll look a little bit thoughtful, and then it'll get, it'll be kind of like, take it, Charlie. And he'll take it exactly where it needs to go. When you talk about everybody has such good taste in that place. I mean, the three singers, and that, of course, having heard what I just said about lyrics, the thing that impresses me, because I can't do it, is, Lisa will come in with a brand new song. It's not like we're going to be covering something that people are familiar with. She'll sing something, and then you'll see the three mobilettes get together and just start talking about, okay, how do you want to do this? And work something out really quickly. That's huge talent. Roger, I can, if anybody wants to know what the right rhythm is, was it too fast? What chords are in the song? I mean, he's a drummer. Why does he know the chords to all these songs? And when we're playing, because I've played with him certainly more than anyone else, if I'm feeling a little bit shaky on something, I can look down at his kick drum and see the depression of the kick drum and pick back up where it is that I was supposed to be. And his body language is really expressive in terms of cueing the music. So, you know, that's why if I'm paying attention, I'll generally pay attention to him because I can get everything I need from him to keep the rhythm in place. But everyone in their way just, you know, is right there and contributes exactly the right amount. There's a lot of taste in that band. Maybe sometimes a little bit too fine, you know. I mean, sometimes I'd just like to, you know, get Charlie to turn to 11, you know. It's just sometimes he's so tasteful that it kind of like, where's Charlie? I mean, you probably have heard us at practices just going, Charlie, more Charlie, you know. But that's having a good fault.
He hangs back.
Oh yeah,
He hangs
yeah.
back. Don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
He does. But that's, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Jay, is there anything that you want to ask while we have?
No, it's funny. A lot of stuff we're talking about. We were talking about how I think of everybody we've interviewed so far. When you say that Lou's talked about music the most, that I had all these ideas of questions they should ask just about music, but that's mainly what you talked about. It's been great. Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been great to have you do this project back in about 1974. I mean, it really would have been great because everybody in this town that I knew played something. I mean, you could get groups together, you know, in a heartbeat. Any composition you want. Well, you've met Peter, and you get what Peter does is try to get amalgamations together. And it was that way back then. And African Violets had a studio. Didn't have a studio, but it had this big basement, which was essential when you lived in the neighborhood for not getting kicked out of your house. That was pretty soundproof, and so everyone would keep their equipment there. So, you know, there was a set of drums, there were umpteen amplifiers, everybody kept their guitars there. So, again, you could just walk in, go down there, see who was around, say, you know, let's play some. And so everybody was just playing all the time. And then we all lived within walking distance. And it, you know, it was just everybody was learning at the same time. And that was the background for everything that was occurring. And it was all the relationships, you know, were sort of revolving around that. You know, Sally used to take money at our gigs before we got married. You know, when we were dating, you know, we were charging 50 cents at the place. And of course, nobody wanted to pay. I mean, 50 cents was outrageous. You know, we're going to pay 50 cents to see. So, you know, you had to be kind of tough on the door. So would get Sally and her roommate there and, you know, set them on the door and give them their marching orders, and they'd be there dutifully collecting at the door. And then halfway through the first set would look out and there they'd be dancing out front. You know, but it was just that kind of thing. Everybody contributed something. We have a guy that just came to visit us last week was our sound man in one of those bands. He was also sound man in South Wing. So, you know, so he had a connection with South Wing with Shannon and a connection with me. And it was, you know, you could draw all of these arrows around and say, well, you know, I knew them then, or I played with them then. You know, the idea of Mary Rocap singing in the Elvis band is just, you know, hysterical when you think about it. You know, but there's the connection. Have you seen the tape of that? Of that?
Elvis? No.
Yeah.
Do you have a tape of it?
Yeah, I've got a tape that I could actually loan you. It's very funny. Yeah, sure.
It's oh, that'd be so great.
It's a VHS.
Yeah, we can do that.
California, so I don't see him much, and he came home or came here rather. I was pulling all this stuff out, and he was just freaking.
Well, it is. Who are these guys?
That's me.
Yeah.
That's Billy Stevens. This is Jeff Thomas. There's a guy named Frank Hunter. A guy named how embarrassing. He was the drummer in the Flashbacks, and I can't recall his name.
You'll think of it later. You know, you've gone through some.
Oh yeah,
phases.
yeah. I've got a rubber face.
You have gone through some. But if we could borrow these and scan them, and can we scan them in the morning, Susan, and just bring them back? You're not here during the day?
No.